Greetings, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Dreamscapes. Today we have our friend Jesse Aetherwagon out of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He is the host of the Random Heathen Ramblings podcast on YouTube, also on the podcast outlet of your choice all across the internet. Linktree description below. We're going to get back to him in 2 seconds. Would you kindly, of course, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends. Always need more volunteer dreamers, viewers for the game streams at 5 p.m. daily on the YouTubes, and now multiple platforms. That's very exciting for me. 16 currently available works of historical dream literature. The most recent book 16, Dreams and Their Meanings by Horace G. Hutchinson, working diligently on book 17, finally making some additional progress on that. All this and more at BenjaminTheDreamWizard.com. Donations, links for me as well in the description below. I never say that. Also, BenjaminTheDreamWizard.locals.com if you want to become some kind of a contributing, sustaining member, trying to do build a community there, attached to my Rumble account, etc. That's enough about me. Oh, that's a longer opening than it's normally gone. Back to Jesse. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me. It's good
nice.
Good to be here.
Yeah, well, we could start off with thank you for having me as a guest on your podcast. It was a fascinating discussion. Went a lot longer probably than either of us imagined it would, huh?
It did, and got a good response to it as well.
Nice.
People were engaged with it, and yeah, it was one of those things where, I was kind of stepping out of my comfort zone in terms of talking about things or having people on my show that I, about subject matter that I typically don't. So it was a exploring new territory for me, and to get such a good response out of it was welcome. So yeah, I had a great time with it.
Absolutely. And I posted it on my channel, just a link to your video on your YouTube, and put it up on I've created now a whole media page on my my WordPress, where it's just like, here's all the places I've been interviewed by people, and that's neither here nor there, but just giving you extra promotion. I want people to see it too. I want people to that's just more free advertising for me. I'm not going to argue.
Yeah
It's a win-win.
Yeah, no, for sure. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, also,
I'm with you on that.
I was also impressed and learning by example and hoping to implement that, but impressed by, you're a good interviewer. Of course, maybe I might say I'm a good guest. I just ramble. You just wind me up like a top and set me loose. I'll go off. But you also had, like, when I ran out of things to say, you had questions. I'm not always good with that. I'm good with expressing my own thoughts, but like listening to people. So that's what I was telling myself getting ready for this today. Ask him questions. And so my first thing was like, how did you get into podcasting on this particular subject? Like, that's what people always ask me too. How'd you get into being a dream wizard? But like, what made you want to be the host of the Random Heathen Ramblings? What's that story?
So, when I first started doing like content creation, it was on Facebook, and I was doing like live streams on my Facebook page. And then I was taking those, like downloading those videos after the live stream and uploading them to YouTube on my Midgard Musings YouTube channel. And it all started off just as like not a podcast. It was like talking about topics that were of interest to me, related to my spirituality and my religious preferences, which is a pagan, Germanic paganism. So I'm a polytheist. But anyways, when I was doing that for several years, and I'm like, thinking of topics to talk about, I dabbled into doing podcasting, and it kind of just fit the direction that my channel was going. I was like trying to find how I was going to represent, my brand, and podcasting kind of was the natural flow that things went into. So
very cool.
Season 4 is going on right now. We're in season 4, so for roughly the last 4 years it's been going steady.
I thought about that too. See, I'm bringing it back to me. I always do this, but I thought about doing a seasons thing, and I just decided to number them, and it'll go on as long as it does. But yeah, I just keep it simple. But I thought about that. That's I suppose another question would be, is like, there's always a story of like, how did I get into interpreting dreams? It was a 20-year journey. How did you get into say Norse paganism as the religion for you, as the expression of how you chose to see the world, or what was that journey like?
Well, so I was born and raised in a non-denominational Christian, environment. So, we didn't really label ourselves, or they, as like any kind of ist, you know what I mean? Like not Baptist, not Methodist, not Protestant, nothing like that. It was non-denominational. And so, being raised in that, and then shifting to something like a complete 180, like a total polar opposites, came as a shock. But I moved away from where I'm from. I'm from New York State originally, and I moved to the state of Tennessee when I was about 22 or so, and still was kind of following a Christian practice, and trying to find a church home. And I've been to so many different churches in different denominations, Baptists, Pentecostal, Catholic, Methodist, so I tried different things, and I don't know, like I never really found a place that I could say I was at home with. And I really started to, think for myself more at that stage in my life, and come into things about the way I was raised that I had questions about, or that I was just like, this doesn't it didn't feel right. Like I was going through the motions because that's how I was raised. And I thought that's what you do. You just follow the path of the people before you. And I reached the point probably around the late 2000s where I just abandoned all religious ideologies. Like I stopped going to church. I'm like, I don't even know what I want anymore. And I think I don't want anything, So in a brief time, for a brief time, I was not religious. I didn't have any sort of like spiritual practices. And then right around the time that the History Channel came out with Vikings, that TV show, that first season, I was like, ooh, that looks cool, Vikings. And I saw, some things going on in the show that was a representation of the spirituality of Northern European or Scandinavian people during the Viking Age, which interestingly enough was the time of history where Scandinavia began to become Christian themselves.
Yeah.
So their pagan beliefs were being, eradicated and outlawed in some places.
That's
so
a fascinating historical story. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was like, well, I want to learn more about this, and come to find out, as with many things on TV and in Hollywood, things get embellished or things get romanticized, and I started to learn, like, well, this is not the most accurate representation of how these people lived at the time. It was focusing on the saga-esque aspects of things, the stories of the heroes and whatnot, which is all really fascinating too. But I wanted to learn more about what the average Joe at the time was doing. How did people in that area, in that region, what did they believe in? So you have to go back even further than the Viking Age and earlier than that to know what these people believed in. And so that's kind of where it all started. It started with Vikings on TV.
Yeah.
That was kind of the seed that was planted. But from there, I applied it and actually found like I was at home. I felt like I was doing things that somehow connected to me or were connected to me through a long line of ancestors,
Yeah.
So
very cool.
Of course, yeah, that's kind of how things started for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of, in the most literal, practical, like step-by-step explanation of things, first you become aware that alternatives exist. Like, oh, this isn't the only way to see the world. And then you start looking at, well, what seems right for me? So I've got I have a very similar origin story. I think a lot of people do in America specifically. So I grew up in a house where, we never really went to church, but we were kind of like Christian by default. If you ask my parents, they believe in God. Yes. They read the Bible every day. No, we weren't that kind of pray before a meal family, but it was kind of I don't know, not unexpected and not really a shock, I suppose. I've always been a bit of a contrarian. When I was young, I was like, I think I'm an atheist. And my parents were like, oh, really? Well, okay. Tell me how that works out for you. I would argue with them. They always didn't want to argue with me. I always wanted to argue more than they did. Sorry, Mom. But yeah, this is my way of exploring the world in some ways. Is like, I have these ideas. So challenge me, make me think about it, and let's go. But long story short, I never actually settled into a belief system. I kind of went from more atheist to agnostic, which I consider myself an agnostic atheist. It's a whole thing. But I went from rejecting it as these are methods of control as to more, these are frameworks through which to view the world and understand humans and nature and everything. And, all of these other stories, this mythology, as people call it, it carries important truths. And, on your podcast, I was talking about, that I have an equal respect for Greek mythology, Norse mythology, as I say, not disrespectfully, and Christian mythology. That took longer to come around to say, the Bible, they call it basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Leaving Earth,
right? B-I-B-L-E, right? Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah,
I just heard that again the other day. I'm like, I gotta remember that. That's clever.
Forgot about that.
Fair enough. Well, and I kind of think of it as one version of a best practice guide to being human. Here's the problems you're going to face. Here's our understanding of what it is. Here's the solutions we've come up with. And if you look at each different religion, that's kind of what it is. It's like, here's how to understand yourself and the world around you. So if kind of later in life, heading towards the wizard phase, I wasn't always ready to do this, but I've come to have a deeper respect for those kind of things. Like, maybe there's things I should understand more. And I think it sounds like that's how you got your journey. Is like you hit something that resonated. You're like, whoa, this feels right. Let me look into that. And then you started figuring out their methods of, so I don't know if I don't mean to put you on the spot or make you reveal secrets if they are, but Christian worship would be, well, we go to church on Sunday, we pray before dinner and thank God for the meal. There's practical elements of worship. And, how do you express that, or are you comfortable talking about it? Or I don't know if I don't know if that's private, or if it could be a rude question in your religion. I honestly am ignorant.
Yeah, no, I don't mind. So, and that's really the interesting thing that I came to learn with Norse heathenry, Germanic paganism, is that it is very unlike Christianity, or unlike a lot of other monotheistic belief systems. So I'm talking like Judaism and Islam. They all have this sacred text that they kind of frame their lifestyle around. Their worldviews are largely structured based off of what is in their sacred texts.
Yeah, it's all spelled out.
And yeah, exactly. Like, thou shalt do this, do not, right? All that. And there's none of that in paganism, or in this, at least this version of paganism in Germanic heathenry. There are no sacred texts that we have to go by. Now, there are some things that have been written down, that have been compiled over the years, that make up the lore, right? So there's the stories of the gods and some of their adventures and the things that they're known for and their characteristics and whatnot. That's what makes up the lore, the myths. And there are also sagas, stories of people who did this, that thing, or the other that became well known. And but they're not like a Bible. They're not a book of instructions to base your life around. So the practice, the act of worship, really becomes something that is tailored around your individual desires, like what you want to do, how you want to do it. Now, there are nuances and things that if you put, a bunch of pagans or heathens in a room together, a lot of things are going to mesh. People are going to understand, like, what an altar is, or what certain items that may be recognizable across people that are maybe not just Germanic pagans, but Celtic pagans. Like, certain items, symbols are recognizable as being representations of the divine or the sacred. But in terms of like what is done or how it's done, it's kind of going to vary. But how I practice is I spend a lot of time in nature. I'm a very animistic type person with my practices. Not all pagans or heathens specifically are. Of course, there are a lot of things that get rooted back to the veneration or the acknowledgement of the sacredness of nature. But I connect better, and I connect stronger with the forces of not just the divine, but also the spirits that are near and around me. I believe that we have profane space and we have sacred space, and where the sacred space exists are where the gods and goddesses reside, and they have their things that are going on. We as humans, I believe, exist in profane space, but in profane space we are also interconnected with the spirit realm. So there are things that are both seen and unseen that are happening around us, and when I'm in nature, I feel more a part of that experience. So my worship becomes more of a living thing. It's not so much of, at 9 o'clock every Sunday I'm at church or anything like that. It's more it's a bit more freeform. Yes, there are certain things that are structured, but it's not as specific. And then on top of that, there are certain times of the year that myself and other people who I share similar beliefs with will celebrate holy days or holy tides. So we'll have certain times of the year where we all gather together and we celebrate and have a feast and do our thing in a very uniformed and unified way. So in that aspect, yes, there is structure, there is order, but for the rest of the time, it's pretty easygoing and
right on.
Not as like concreted, structured. I don't mean to say like it's all willy nilly. We're just doing whatever we feel like, but I don't know. It's kind of like somewhere in between that and
good deal.
Catholic Mass.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of where I was thinking I might go next with the questioning is like, so Catholic Mass, say on Easter or Christmas. I mean, those are number one. Okay, it was a couple of thoughts I had. So this is where I go, whew, my brain explodes. You mentioned the sacred and the profane, and that's actually in Christian teachings as well, archaic Christian teaching. Like a lot of people don't think of it that way today, but that the physical world, the fallen world, as Christians would say, is the profane space. It is where, and profane meaning everything is necessarily imperfect. And then there's the realm of the gods, or God, with heaven, which is perfect. And as above, so below. In the chemical sense was meant to be like, try to bring yourself in alignment. Number one, as above dictates what will be below, like God made the universe, that kind of thing, or the gods. And what you want to do is bring yourself in alignment with sacred, even though you're in a profane space, and it will necessarily be imperfect, but you're aiming for that. So we get the biblical concept of sin is, falling short of the perfect ideal, which only exists in the sacred space, trying to sacrifice, in a sense, yourself in this profane world. Okay, I was going somewhere with that too. But then the idea of, I don't know if you have comments on that, but that was one thought I had.
Yeah, no. There's like, there's, divine order or divine plan. Like that's not really something that I subscribe to with my particular practices. I don't know how other heathens or pagans would. But I don't really see the similarities with that. And it's more, what do you call it? Cyclical. So there was a beginning to things and there's an end to things, but it's not a hard start or stop. It's cyclical. It's like the cycles of the seasons and stuff. So, death and rebirth are constant. So when things are happening that, we would say like what Christians would say, it's God's will, you know what I mean? Like there's some sort of divine plan for everything and everything is subject to that sacred power's wishes or will. It's not really the same amongst our gods. They're not architects of the universe that are play, like the humans are not their playthings. You know what I mean? Like it's they're doing their thing and we're doing ours, and we can enter into some sort of a semblance of like a contract with them through our rituals and through our practices. We can, not all the time, not necessarily every day, but we can pray to our gods. We can sacrifice or gift or what's called sometimes what's called bloat or feigning. Right, we're giving a gesture of gifts to the divine in hopes of receiving gifts back, and that's a very common concept in paganism as a gift for a gift. So we are doing things and we are trying to appeal to our sacred powers through the exchange of gifts. We give to them in hopes of receiving gifts back. And we see this happen in many cultures as well, right? When crops were not doing so well, what did the people do? They, it would sacrifice to their powers, their sacred powers, in hopes to appease them and get better crops and all these sorts of things. If they were losing wars, it's time to sacrifice somebody or something to try to make it better. So
God, that just
we're not doing all that kind of stuff anymore, but it's it's not the sacrificing of animals or people, obviously, but it's, you know, the gifting exchange is what I'm referring to.
Yeah, that just made me think of, I don't know if you've seen, speaking of TV shows, there was one that came out recently. I don't know if it was on AMC or Stars or something, but it was one of, let's see, the guy who wrote Sandman. He wrote a bunch of other, American Gods, the series.
Oh, yeah.
Did you see that one, or you were aware of it at least?
Yes.
The beginning scene of that, like, well, we're warriors and our God is a warrior God. And so we're going to fight we're going to divide in half. We're going to fight each other, and whoever's living will accept the sacrifice, hopefully. And it was then that the wind started to blow and they got back on their boat and they were finally able to leave this shore they were trapped on. Fascinating depiction of that. I mean, that gave me chills. That's fantastic.
I like that how they I forget his name, but the guy that they cast for Mr. Wednesday.
Yeah.
Really, and that's well Odin. Done. You know what I mean?
Wotan, as he says.
That was yep. And then that was a great representation of that, and just how he that whole scene where he's like calling himself by different names, and he's got his wolves and his ravens, and it's like you see him in the clouds, and it's like, they did a good job with that.
Oh yeah. And this may not be your perspective on it, but me as an agnostic atheist, not subscribed to anything, I try and understand these things through my own framework. And I would say for the non-believer, and that goes for if you're not a believer in the Christian faith, or vice versa, if you are a Christian, you're not believer in the heathen faith. The way I look at it on a metaphysical level is you got to pray to the right gods, or you pray to God if that's your thing, and perform the right sacrifices in life. And that can mean you go to the gym today so you don't have a bad back tomorrow. That kind of a thing. There's a sacrifice of today's effort and energy to get a gift from the universe tomorrow, to have your efforts pay off. But more than that is the idea of praying to the right God. So if what you're looking for is wisdom on a particular subject, you go to Odin and you try and perform a sacrifice that you try to, in a sense, invite into you the spirit of Odin to say, give me the benefit of the element that you control, the aspect of your archetype. Let me invite that spirit into me. I don't know if that comports with kind of how you're thinking about of your rituals, or kind of like embodying archetypes. Like I'm trying to be a wizard in practice, that kind of thing.
Yeah. There's definitely parts to that that apply to heathenry, you know, because different gods are talked about in the myths as being more or less associated with specific things, you know, and one of the things that Odin is associated with in the stories is wisdom and sacrificing himself to obtain that wisdom. He cuts out his own eye to receive a drink from Mimir's well. He hangs himself on a tree for 9 days and nights to receive mystic knowledge of the runes, right? So there's more than that to him, but that's a big component there. That's a big aspect that Odin gets associated with. So it's not uncommon to see people take that literally. So when they're in their practices in trying to learn the runes, maybe or gain wisdom, try to invoke Odin in that part of things. Got to be tricky. Got to be careful with that though, because Odin's also very cunning, and you don't just get one part of Odin; you get the whole shebang. And so it's a big undertaking. You don't just call out or ask them to come by without knowing kind of what you're dealing with.
For sure. Yeah. And then of course, you know, anyone went out there in YouTube land, you know, we're not recommending rituals of eye removal or hanging oneself from a tree. No. You know, that kind of a thing. These are definitely, yeah. I think we perform different rituals.
These are gods. Yeah. I mean, again, you look at the stories, it's like these were divine beings that did these things. So yeah, by no means am I advocating that we, harm ourselves.
Well, no, for sure. That had to say it officially, and also because I think it's funny to say that. But there's also fantastic, I think, symbolism in these things, like specifically those two elements of Odin. What happened, or what does it mean to have removed an eye? So my understanding, you can correct me, please, but our eyes look at the physical world. They're designed to interact with and interpret and navigate the physical world. He removes one, and now one eye is only has internal vision. It can only see within because it's no longer distracted by or focused on the outside world. So in the lesson or the story I would draw from that, and I think it's accurate, but like I said, you tell me, is that in order to gain the kind of wisdom or understanding that he had, you've got to take one eye and turn it inward. You have to look at yourself as much as the external world, not be distracted so much by it. And there's, in my estimation, some parallels on that of like the idea of Jesus, and he says, the world will hate you if you're doing the godly thing. It's like there's an inner thing that is not of the external world that is at least of equal value, if not superior. But I'll stop there and let you kind of comment on my take on something which I may not know anything about.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to be said for that, and he's not the only, that's not the only example. And we're talking strictly like, Norse myth.
Mm-hmm.
There's other stories and other myths that carry similar stories, or examples, but like he's not even the only figure in the mythology who sacrificed part of himself for the greater good. Mm-hmm. Tyr lost his hand. He sacrifices his hand to bind this giant wolf who is destined to destroy all the gods. You know what I mean? So there's other parallels to that. I think as far as the eye thing goes, yeah, it's your vision that's how you capture everything. But it's also like a window to your soul. Like you can tell a lot of a person by just looking them in the eye, and giving that part of yourself up really is like it's heavy duty, I think, because you're handicapping yourself and giving yourself the less ability to capture things, but also kind of restricting or altering the views that are coming into you too. What people see.
Definitely.
So I think that's a really good observation. How the significance of the eye. Could have been anything. It's like cut a finger off. Nope. It's the eye.
Yeah, and definitely too. You mentioned
that was a price.
Tyr, and what is it? Fenris. Fenris is the wolf, and that
Fenrir. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. And so it's fascinating too, because if you're in the snowy northern wastes and you're a looking at your environment for exemplars of, and no wonder you would think there were ice giants, because everything's ice everywhere, and there's giants in the hills and whatnot, and literally or figuratively. I go figuratively, but also you're looking at your environment and you're like, well, there's something powerful to the idea that wolves were probably the only predator in that area that was really terrifying to man. There were lots of dangers of it's falling in the icy river and freezing to death and, tree, all kinds of different things, accidents that could happen. But as far as like a powerful force, you don't want to be out alone in the dark, in the night, in the snow, and a pack of wolves is on your trail. So of course, the destruction, the cyclical nature of, say, a human life that's a world ending catastrophe is I'm alone with this wolf that's going to devour me. So of course the icon of the wolf looms large for that. Says we're going for the Evo psych angle on things, but then it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Too, and I like that idea of the cyclical thing. I think there's more of that even to Christianity than people realize. I think there's a misunderstanding, and maybe not. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to be cautious on that. And there's lots of people that disagree, but I don't think there's one apocalypse coming. I think the idea of an apocalypse is circular. It's the ending. It's an ending of things. It's you go to school, you suffer, you sacrifice, you have trials and tribulations, you come out of it with a diploma or a degree or something. That terminus is an apocalypse, the end of your school life, the end of your life as a student, and now you begin on another life. And there's an apocalypse to the day and night cycle. The night ends, the day begins, etc. I think there's more of that than people realize, and there's not as much. I think a lot of it is we use different symbols and language. And there's different hierarchies of importance. Don't get me wrong, religions are not all the same, but there's a lot more similarities than people realize in terms of, because we're all starting with the human condition, and that is universal. And then we diverge in the explanations for it. So I don't know if you had comments. I'll stop rambling. Random wizard ramblings.
Random wizard ramblings. I like it. Yeah. I was talking with somebody, I think it was actually my dad, years ago, and there was always, when I became pagan and I decided to do what I was doing and have been doing, it was, understandably so, right? It was met with some opposition by by my family.
Oh, it's just a phase, right?
Yeah, well, that, or it was like, well, come back to us, come talk to us when you've gathered your senses and you've come back to your senses, sort of thing, and this is wrong, blah blah blah. But like one of the things, like my dad was always saying, is like, oh yeah, look at the way the world is now, and yeah, it's the sign of the end times, or the end is near. And I'm like, Dad, people in Europe were probably saying the same thing during the bubonic plague.
The Black Death, that's the first thing came to my
Or
mind.
the Black Death.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because there's even stuff like that in the Bible, right? Diverse diseases and how, wars and sicknesses everywhere. I'm like, look at what was happening, 600-700 years ago in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
They were probably thinking this is the end. And maybe it was an end. It surely was. There was an end to a lot of things.
There's an end to a lot of people.
We had, we experienced a global pandemic just a few years ago.
Yeah.
And we still see the effects of that happening to this day. So it's, and I'm sure there's other things that you can sit and think about that have happened in the world, in history, that's been documented, that people at the time were probably going, all right, this is it. And it was it for that time, for that moment. But then there's the next thing. There's another thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I think it's and then you also got to look at too. I think that what are people reading nowadays? They're reading translations or transliterations of texts that have been worked over and over and over and over again. And it's on like that old game Telephone, right? Where you say something in one person's ear, and then by the time it gets 15 people around, it's like a totally different story. How accurate can we really say almost any like ancient texts are, as well as they could have been preserved over the centuries, over the millennia? There's probably things that have gotten lost in translation that what we're reading don't really mean that. Yeah, the way they were originally written.
That is a big problem. I mean, it goes for the Christians, so I'm the most familiar with that in Greek mythology and stuff. But a lot of people don't realize that the translations of the Bible have been misunderstood. And two big examples are, the idea of thou shalt not murder versus thou shalt not kill. A lot of people think all killing bad. Well, the word basically meant murder. The original, I think it was the Greek or Latin or Aramaic, wherever they got it from way back in the day. The other one was the idea of the meek shall inherit the earth. And I didn't learn this until recently. I think Jordan Peterson brought it up or something. But he said the word translates more like people who have swords and know how to use them, but keep them sheathed. So it isn't the meek as in the harmless, the ineffectual, the people who couldn't affect change if they wanted to. It's people who could absolutely be terrifyingly brutal and evil and say that's wrong. I'm not going to do that. Those are, and the idea is that's the kind of people we want to lift up and say as an ideal, perhaps. Those are the true worthy inheritors of the earth, rulers of.
Interesting.
That we should all become those kind of people. I was going somewhere with that.
Yeah.
Mistranslations.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So it was one. I watched a documentary recently where the part of it at least was a guy who went to some village in Northern Europe, and it was to learn the oral traditions of this particular group of people. They're a lot of those local teachings, or more of it was some kind of religious tradition. And there was an old guy, and he only knew it in his head, and it had never been written down. And this guy went to learn it because when that guy died, that was it. No one else knew this story. So he went to learn that. I can't help but think that has happened with a lot of these things, or like things get left out, or the more dynamic, adventurous, romantic versions of these stories get preserved. And then, maybe filtered through the translations at the time, which could have been late early 1800s when people were discovering these things and trying to preserve them. And then you got to think, is it actually the story? I don't know if you've come across that in terms of like you're going with your best guess, or you've actually found some more authoritative sources that you feel are like, this seems to represent it pretty well. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Well, I even know that like with some of the stuff that, again, no sacred text, but like some of the stories, the myths, the lore, the sagas of Northern Europe, some of the things that have been written down in modern English over the years are starting to be rewritten and reworked, because scholars are finding new things out and going, oh wow, that word that was originally translated, 50, 60, however long years ago, that's probably not that word, because education and all this stuff grows over time, and people come into the mix that bring new perspectives, new knowledge. And so again, I think that the same thing is what happens to, when was the last time the Bible was the Holy Bible, right? When was the last time that book was revised? We got so many different translations of it, but when was the last time? Yeah. I mean, like, you got the New King James, and you got the New International, and the Living Day translation, and I'm feeling like a box of chocolates version. I mean, like I'm saying, like there's so many different versions and translations. When was the last time it was reworked from anything? And is it really just people taking modern English language and putting a twist on it? Because again, I remember growing up reading the King James Bible, because that was the only version of the Bible that we could read. That we didn't even read other versions or translations. That was it, the KJV. And I remember thinking as a kid that Moses and Abraham and all these people, that they were talking like Shakespeare, because how the and I'm like, wait,
thy thou,
I grew up and again start thinking for myself. I'm like, hold on a minute. They weren't British. They were Middle Eastern. They were speaking. They weren't even speaking modern Hebrew. You know what I mean? And they were speaking ancient Hebrew and Aramaic and those languages that are all but dead now. So how do you translate stuff from those texts? It's kind of like how some of the stuff that I'm into gets translated into modern English. Old Norse is not spoken anymore. Mm-hmm. At least not in the real, yes, academically and in certain circles it is, but and there are modern languages that are close to it. But Old Norse, Old English, all these old Germanic languages are for all intents and purposes dead languages.
Yeah. And
so you get scholars and people that come in that read these old texts and bring new life to it, and like, oh yeah, you thought it said tree. No, what it actually means is, house or something. As an example. Mm-hmm. So,
no, for sure, and that's the thing too. Is like there's a lot of nuance to words even today. Like you'll look in the dictionary and there'll be like 6 or 7 different definitions for a single word, because there's different shades of meaning on it depending on the context. Maybe 6 or 7 is too many, but let's say if we go with that, like this is the rune, and they thought, or the word for tree, and they're like, no, it's house. So wait a minute, it means a house specifically made of wood versus one made of stone. And then Not only that, but there's an idiom in that, maybe for example, in that cultural space where it's like denigrating someone by saying you live in a house of wood versus stone. It's like, oh, your dwelling is temporary. You don't really intend to stay here. It's like someone who's just passing through and not intending to be trusted. I made all this up, but that's the kind of nuance you can get from one word saying tree, that's a house, or it's a house made of wood, that kind of thing. And that's when you get that cultural context, sometimes it makes all the difference in things, and really understanding what someone means by a particular story with those kind of elements. I mean, I'm learning that too in my kind of reworking of the of the Aesop's fable stuff. I'm taking out a lot of the thee, thy, thou stuff, because some of them have it, some of them don't. So I'm standardizing it. And I'm also taking some of the complicated run-on sentences that didn't have enough parentheses or whatever, and change it. So I'm actually, in my work on that, I'm actually changing the story from their original translation some 200 years ago when this guy did this book, but hopefully making it more readable, keeping the intent of it, the elements of the story. I'm trying to be extremely faithful to it and just make it like the sentences make sense and they aren't full of commas and reversed things and asides. It's hard to explain, but when you see it, I'm like, if you look at the original version of it and then you look at the story I put together, it's the same story, but it's just a little easier to understand what's going on without 17 commas in one giant run-on sentence.
It probably has like similar, and again, I don't know, but it almost sounds like because like Norse poetry is written in meters, and it has a very specific flow and pattern of how it was written. It doesn't translate well into modern English. The way that we speak and write doesn't translate well. So trying to take those things and make sense of it, and because again, like you're reading it in the ways that it was written, 1,000 years ago, versus and how people spoke and wrote back then versus how it's done now, and it's that's a huge thing too. So probably similarly with what you do, you're faced with what I think is maybe similar challenges, right?
Yeah, and then what they were doing is the original translations for the Aesop's Fables came from people translating Greek, and they had a different syntax, I guess is the way to say it. What made me think of it is like direct translations of, say, Japanese for anime. If you go the direct translation, I think one of the words means this person is here, and what they mean is I'm home. And that's the meaning of that phrase, is I have arrived at my home. But it's more than that. It's like walking in the door, like an American person saying, "Hi, honey, I'm home," or "Hey, family, I'm here. Welcome me." It's like an announcement of your presence in that way. So, but the direct translation, yes. And I got this is just examples. People, weebs out there are going to go, he didn't know what he's talking about. It's not the exact thing, but it's something like that. So when you get these, when you get these translations on the screen and then you look at the actual words they spoke, it's like, that's not the literal translation. Here's the meaning of it. And then it's spoken in that way. I was going somewhere with that. It's probably the same with the Norse stuff and how it's spoken.
There are things called kennings that are seen a lot in Norse literature. And what really all it is what it means is like instead of calling honey, like instead of saying honey, they would use it. They would say something like bees sweat, or something like that. The bees sweat, or things like that. So you were like, you could see those two words separate or whatever, and if you don't understand like the context, you could be thinking, oh, there's a bee that's sweating. Like, no, we're talking about honey.
Or someone might say, that's stupid. Bees don't sweat. Like, they mean honey.
They're right. Yeah.
That's someone who doesn't want to get it. I remembered another thing I was going to ask you about, the whole ritual type of thing. So we were talking about Easter having its own specific Catholic mass for that specifically, where they have a particular program. They read certain things and celebrate that in that way. And so there was two things: the idea of a lot of the original pagan or holidays being kind of co-opted by the church in some ways, and this is going back 2,000 years when they all set it all up. A lot of these things pre-existed. But also the idea that they're, the ritual itself. What am I trying to say? I had a better question like 20 minutes ago. So if there's a Catholic mass for say Christmas, the winter solstice, what is it? What would that maybe look like if you have a gathering of pagans, and what elements of the ritual would be common, and what would they mean to you in your religious context? How do you celebrate that?
Yeah. Well, the really funny thing about that is that a lot of folks want to say, like what you were saying, is that these Christian observances, Easter and Christmas specifically, well, they were pagan holidays before they were co-opted or appropriated by Christians. Not necessarily. The Christians had their own thing. Yeah, not exactly. But the Christians had their own thing, and interestingly enough, like you're talking about like Christmas, winter solstice. One of the big topics that comes up every year is Yule. And sometimes even in, I think it's Sweden nowadays, Jol or Jol in their language is the Christmas holiday. They call it Jol, and it means Christmas, or it's their Christmas celebration. But Yule, historically, before the Viking Age, was not done at that time. It wasn't done in December at right after the winter solstice. It was actually done later on in the middle of their winter.
Oh,
so when we talk about things like celebrating solstices, that really kind of goes into what type of pagan people are, right? Because some people will observe and celebrate things that happen on solstices and equinoxes. Germanic pagans will do that too, but I favor more of a historical side. I'm not like a hardcore reconstructionist type person when it comes to how I practice. I do leave a lot of freedom to express things in a modern context. But the ancient Germanic peoples, they didn't, at least so far as we know, have observances for the solstices. Their holidays, their holy tides were circular. They were formulated around the lunar solar patterns. So the full moons were when things were celebrated by them. And but so I mean, I went off a little bit on the question, but in terms of like the types of things, our midwinter celebration is Yule. So it typically happens depending on when the full moon is. It's sometimes in January, sometimes it's beginning, sometimes it's the end. Some years it might even be beginning of February, but usually it happens to be somewhere in the month of January. And the types of things that are going on there are very similar to what you might see at a Christmas, party or a Christmas feast. There's lots of food. There are exchange of gifts. We do games. We host or we hold. At least our group does. Our group holds a thing called Sumble, which is like another minor ritual that we see mentioned in different sources. That it's an opportunity to toast and boast and give oaths. So toast, boast, and oaths is what we say, and then Sumble is like it's a drinking sort of ceremony where there's drinks involved, but it's not meant to be like let's all just take shots and see who's left standing. You got to have your wits about you for Sumble. So that's typically something that you'd see at like a Yule feast by pagans.
Very cool.
But yeah, like it's a midwinter thing. So the reason why we're doing it is that we've made it through the harshest times of the year. And in the north, in the far north in Northern Europe, winter was serious business. And if you made it through winter, you're good. You know what I mean? And so we look at it as a time of celebration to look forward to the coming lighter days, warmer days, time to get out and about and enjoy nature more. You're not stuck inside from the cold winter months, and so it's looking forward to the brighter and warmer days ahead, and doing the types of things that you would do with people and with your friends and with your tribes or your communities, and getting back out there and doing it all. So
nice. Well, I'm happy to take a stab in the dark and be wrong and be corrected. And I love that you kind of went off on that a little bit and said a lot of different stuff about let me not reframe it exactly, but kind of show what it really looks like versus popular misconception. Because there's a lot of people out there that have no idea. And that's where I'm coming from, that place of ignorance of like, here's what I think, here's what I've heard. Tell me about it. But, and in general, I think, so you said it's not borrowed from or adapted from necessarily between, say, old pagan religions and Christianity. I think there's a convergence though of what am I trying to say? The same idea expressed in different ways. Like, it's not that they took from it. It's like that they also had the same idea that these certain cyclical patterns were relevant and necessary.
Well, see, what was interesting about specifically what's interesting about the Yule Christmas thing is that is that because Yule was historically observed when it was observed, it got moved to the Christmas time frame. It got moved to that date and time by a king, because he was converting to Christianity. And the Christians already had their quote Christ Mass, which is what Christmas is. They already had that. So in order to convert the pagans, he's like, hey guys, we're moving Yule, and it's going to happen now on such and such a day. And we're also changing our calendar. And instead of it being based around when the full moon was going to hit. So like, in other words, Yule for us Germanic pagans is not the same day every year, unlike where Christians celebrate Christmas on the same day, December 25th, every year. Yule isn't like that. Historical Yule isn't like that. It's done whenever the full moon is. That's why I said sometimes it's in the beginning of January, sometimes it's at the end, sometimes it may even be in February. It's the patterns, the cycles of the moon. Is
it related to the solstice in like the first full moon after the solstice or something, or
the winter solstice does have it does have a play in that. So Yule will land on the first full moon after. I think it's the first full moon after the winter solstice.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it's 3 full moons after winter nights, which happens earlier in. It's around like October for us, but winter starts in the far north earlier than it does for us here in the continental, like in my part of the country, at least continental United States.
The further north you go, it's like you get all the way up to Alaska and it's just winter almost all year round until the mosquitoes come out for 3 months.
Right.
Like that.
And that's closer to where things were in Scandinavia, you know, so longitude, latitude, all that, it's you're kind of on the same plane there.
Pole, yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, the solstice does have, it's kind of a measurement. It's not like, let's celebrate the winter solstice, but once the winter solstice hit, they knew, okay, well, the next full moon is Yule.
Very cool. Yeah.
We made it halfway through the winter months. So.
Yeah. And where I was going with the idea of the similarity is like, you know, not to say there's no difference, of course there is. But I think there's Carl Jung would say something like a collective unconscious substrate to it, which is the recognition of patterns and the seasons of the year and how winter is, and then also to do with human psychology. So what I've always thought, and I don't know if it's possible, I came to this thought myself and someone had already thought it, or it's a new thought, who knows, or I heard it somewhere and I don't remember, but the idea that what is the most necessary for human beings in the deepest, darkest heart of winter where, you know, maybe you got to stretch the food out a little more. Maybe it's miserable outside and you can't frolic in the glen and it's just death and miserable and all the leaves are off the trees and all this stuff. What is necessary for humans to survive? Well, it's a little bit of celebration. It's celebrating family, coming together for a feast that maybe you've waited, you've stretched your supplies so you can have this one day where everyone has a really good time and celebrates, hey, we're all still alive. And I you know, as opposed to, I used to be big on, I still don't celebrate holidays, it's my thing, but as opposed to being like, oh God, this forced ritual and feels so fake and whatnot, I kind of came around to, you know, sometimes that's necessary. Or I would say I've always been a bit of an outside the fishbowl type of guy. I kind of see why a culture needs those rituals now more than I used to. Even if I don't feel any particular inclination to participate. I'm like, well, I'm glad other people do. I'm glad actually they're getting what they need from that. So I'd say the same things with, you know, say in the spring, you know, whether you celebrate at the equinox or not, but there's a human need to recognize the rebirth of nature. The little bunny rabbits come out and birds lay their eggs and the green comes back onto the trees. And then we get Easter. And not only that, the Americanized, commercialized version of the bunny rabbit laying eggs and hiding them and candy and whatnot. Still a celebration of this rebirth type of thing, you know. Anyway, I love those. I think people, I don't know. I don't know what my recommendation would be, like people to have a more of a comparative religion analysis of what are all the similar things and why. Why do we all develop things that serve similar purposes in different forms? I think it would give them a better, broader understanding of human nature and why these rituals are important and why it's kind of important for most people to have them, no matter what they are. I think it was I don't know if it was Elie Wiesel, the guy that survived the Holocaust or not, but one of them was like, well, how do I know? I think he wrote a book or wrote some famous thing where he was saying, well, how could I know religion was good or bad? Is it good or bad that people have religion? And that sounds actually, like, I think of Elie Wiesel because it thinks of me as like kind of an atheist Jew perspective in some ways of like, I don't know, God, are you there? My life's been pretty miserable. I think it was him. But anyway, and one of these guys came to the understanding that it almost doesn't matter what religion you pick, but you got to pick one and commit. Otherwise, it's not going to serve the purpose. You can't kind of be an eclectic mishmash and call that a faith in a way. Or you got to be like me and say, well, I step back from all of it and I appreciate all of it from a distance, but I don't participate in any of it. I'm not a little bit Christian, a little bit pagan, a little bit this and that and the other. It's not coherent in a way that that was his point, that, you know, if you're going to pick a faith, you got to commit and you can't do a mishmash or hodgepodge eclectic mix of religions in that way. So I don't know if I was going somewhere with that. That's just what I was thinking. I like the order that I found with what I do, and again it fits, and there is structure and there is order to it in its own way. I know plenty of people who identify as, you know, eclectic pagans, and they incorporate a lot of different aspects of different cultures in their practices. Hey, if it works for you, who am I to bash it? You know what I mean? But that's the thing. It's got to work for you. You got to, you know, make it work. And everybody's on their own path. Everybody's on their own journey. And that's part of it is figuring it out as we go. Yeah, fair enough. Well, I just realized we've been talking for like almost an hour, and you and I both have maybe about an hour left at the most. last thing I wanted to do, I want to jump into the dream thing, but also I don't know that we mentioned or I asked you much how dreams figure into the Norse religion or Norse paganism. I think we mentioned it a little bit in our talk, but I wanted to expand on it a little bit more of like, you said there were maybe some famous dreams. And then how does that instruct, say, a Norse pagan person to understand their own dreams? Is there a framework in there that you feel you can explain, or?
I mean, I can really only speak to just some of the what little bit I know that comes up in some of the stories. So, I mean, in terms of how it fits into our framework, I don't think I can definitively say it does or doesn't.
Okay.
Obviously, people dream, and everybody has dreams, and I think it's human nature to want to know the meaning behind them, if there is any. And so we come up with our own ideas or maybe experiences that have happened in relative recent time of when that dream occurred that, we're like trying to piece the puzzles together. But like, in the Norse side of things, or there's some stories that talk about heroes having dreams and being visited by an ancestor or one of the gods or a Valkyrie or something, you know what I mean, because of a battle that's about to take place or some big thing that's about to happen, and that dream kind of sets the tone for what is to happen next. Like they think that, oh, now it's something I have to do because so and so came to me in this dream. So I think for a lot of folks that are along the same path that I am or similar path, there's a propensity to look at dreams as this sort of voice from beyond that comes to us and gives us something to think about.
Very cool.
That's about as much I can say to it, though.
No, not a problem. I was just wondering if there was a particular, I don't know, dogma is, used derogatorily, but I think, it's a set of beliefs around a particular thing. Here's how to understand it. Go, If there was a particular dogma, so to speak, around the importance of dreams, do you appeal to a particular god for dreams? If they come and they feature a specific god, is that meant to be a message in your understanding, or is it a little, it doesn't really say much about that. So you do your best with it.
I haven't encountered anything like that. Gotcha. And in the Norse side of stuff, there's really not like a god of dreams, like I think the Greeks or some of the other pantheons of different cultures, right? There's really not like a god of one particular thing. The gods just are associated with a lot of different things, and have associations attached to them from their characteristics or things that they're known for in the stories.
Fair enough. Well, I think the fact that you were aware and detailed just a few of the types of dreams, a particular hero had a dream that was a message from a god, or visited by an ancestor in a dream. These go along the lines of what have been described as typical dreams in recent books and in the history of dream lore. The idea that humans have certain recurring patterns in dreams, and one of them is being visited by deceased relatives that bring encouragement, bring warning, and whether we believe they really came back, which who knows? I don't know. I can't prove that or disprove it. So, or we just think, that we summoned that remembrance of them, our impression or image of them in our mind to give us the wisdom they would have if they were still here. They'd say, hey, I know if they were, and we can imagine, what would your grandfather say about you doing that thing? Hey, come on. He's not going to like that. He would know. He would call you stupid. He'd hit you on the back of the head. And we have a dream where we imagine he's coming along. Oh, okay. You're reminding yourself, yes, I know better than this. Whoa, your image on my screen is going crazy. It just straightened out. It was going, wada, 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 wada. Yeah, no, it was like, that was amazing. I thought I was having a stroke or an acid flashback. Okay. So to not short you out of time and make sure we can do the thing. I'm going to make a note of the time because I always do that. What is it? It's about 59 minutes. Okay. Benjamin the Dream Wizard wants to help you pierce the veil of night and shine the light of understanding upon the mystery of dreams. Every episode of his Dreamscapes program features real dreamers gifted with rare insight into their nocturnal visions. New Dreamscapes episodes appear every week on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and other video hosting platforms, as well as free audiobooks highlighting the psychological principles which inform our dream experience and much, much more. To join the wizard as a guest, reach out across more than a dozen social media platforms and through the contact page at benjaminthedreamwizard.com, where you will also find the wizard's growing catalog of historical dream literature available on Amazon, featuring the wisdom and wonder of exploration into the world of dreams over the past 2,000 years. That's Benjamin the Dream Wizard on YouTube and at benjaminthedreamwizard.com. 59 minutes. How about that? Okay, as per my usual process, we're going to get into the dream thing. I'm going to shut up and listen, and then we're going to try and figure it out together. So I'm ready when you are.
Okay. So I had this dream that involved a friend of mine, a really close friend of mine. And this friend of mine has become very much like a brother to me. You know, he's not related to me by blood, but we're brothers, you know. We've shared enough experiences over the years that we are comfortable calling ourselves, you know, brother. But this dream happened. I want to say it was about 2 or 3 years ago, and in the dream, this friend of mine had this like medicine shop of sorts. He's very animistic and does like shamanic. He's a Norse heathen or a Norse pagan, but his practices lean heavily into the shamanic side of things. So he had this like medicine shop, you know, and I remember it was really lowly lit, you know, so it was kind of dark, low ceilings, but there was like lots of herbs, you know, healing items, oils, tonics, and stuff just all throughout. I don't know specifically about this next part, like the circumstances around it, but a particular rune called Uruz, Uruz, came up. And again, I don't remember why what the circumstances were about it, but I was holding this rune in my hand. And he said to me, I'm going to show you some wild expletive about this rune. And then that was all he said to me. I'm just going to show you some wild about this rune. Next thing I remember is there was a woman in the room that I didn't see or know of before. It's like she just kind of appeared. I didn't recognize her. I can't recall what she looked like, but or very many like defining features. I from my memory, from my recollection, I think she was kind of short, but also like shrouded, you know, like you really couldn't see much of her. Kind of thin, darker skinned, like almost like tanned. But she had a table runner that she laid down on a table, like a long white table runner. And she started painting on it. And she was painting symbols that again, not like really anything specific that I'd ever seen, but they resembled or reminded me of Icelandic charms, Icelandic Galder staves, which in this is very new agey kind of thing. But when I say new age, I'm talking like in the 1700s. These were like charms, mandala type looking things. But they are also though like singular linear lines with symbols and stuff on them. And again, the symbols that she was painting weren't exactly Icelandic charms that I've ever seen, but they reminded me of it. They looked very similar. And then I'm reading the notes here. So they were, like I said, I didn't recognize them. They weren't completely foreign. And hold on, I'm going to move something here real quick. Sorry about that.
Take your time.
He was in another room. My friend was, while she was in the room, like painting the thing, he was in another room, helping someone else. Like, I don't know who that person was, but he was like occupied with somebody else. And then from that point on, things just kind of got a little fuzzy. Like I guess I woke up from the dream, but I don't remember much after that. The woman in the dream never spoke. Like there was no talking from her. She never spoke to me. She didn't say anything to him. She was just kind of there and just like took this table runner out and started painting on it. And then that's about as much as I can recall from that.
Okay, that's good enough. That's plenty of stuff to work with. It's good, great imagery, love it. And don't worry about it. You know, things being. Everyone says that's about all I can remember, and then we get like a 2-hour conversation out of it. And there's so much more. There's always so much more. Just talking about it brings it back. So we start with you're in your friend's medicine shop. Do you remember anything about, say, you described a little bit of the environment, but how big was it generally? Where were you standing in the shop? Were you near the front door? Were you behind the back counter? Was there a counter? A little bit of the physical layout. What do you see when you think of the shop?
So it was a small shop, low ceilings. I was in, and it was cluttered. Like there was a lot of stuff going on. There was not a lot of space to move. So like the shelves that had like all of the various like healing items, herbs, tonics, whatever, they were packed. They were packed shelves. So it was like kind of a clustered area, very congested in a feel. And I want to say that we were kind of like in a central location to the room. I seem to recall facing a doorway or a window, some sort of opening. But I never left. Like I don't remember walking in and I don't remember leaving. I was just there, right? So it was again kind of if he was in another room, it was maybe a 2-room structure. But again, it was low ceilings. I don't, like I could do this and touch it, like it was not very tall ceilings, lowly lit. There were windows, but again, they were kind of small. So it didn't let a lot of natural light in. It was daytime if I remember right, like the light from the outside was daylight.
Okay. Gotcha. Where am I going with this here? You described as a lot of as healing items. So you associate his shamanistic practice as, is that the way I want to ask that question? Is that related to that person in real life? Would you consider him, because he is on the broadly shamanistic side of things, he's a bit of a healer, whether he's actually prescribing anything to anyone, that is his approach to things, what he's trying to accomplish with people. It's something about his personality.
Yes. Yeah. Very, was it homeopathic? Like the natural side of things, like what can you grow, drink, eat, consume naturally that grows in the natural world that's going to help your health, your wellness, spirituality. Yes.
So this place is very representative of him in that way. Like this is maybe his natural environment type of thing. So it's very much what I'm seeing here is what makes sense to me, and you might agree or not, but I think so. There's like a respect for him as a person exemplified in this shop, and it's fantastic. If I just put myself in this room, just the opening scene, suddenly you're there, you're near something, you're facing a door. I want to ask you what was on the other side, or if you knew, was it the front door? But we'll get around to that. But it is. There's lots of iconic stuff. So it's very small and densely packed. So maybe representative of him is like his impact is not large. Maybe doesn't have a large clientele or a lot of people. He's running a very small operation, but it's serious. It is packed full of all the good things that he could give to people. Dimly lit in a way, which I think that in my estimation, again, always if I'm on the wrong track or it doesn't resonate with you, but the idea that two things come to mind. That might be a bit of an iconic representation of the mystery of the herbalist is the dimly lit shop. So there's a bit of a media representation of that, but also it might be dimly lit because that's not your specialty. there's no brightness of the light shining on all the things where you can read all the labels because you are intimately familiar with it. It's also, as I would say, representing a personal mystery to you of like, he knows so much about this stuff that I don't know as much as he does. So I have respect for his, not skill is the wrong word, but knowledge of the herbalist realm. I'll stop there for just a moment.
He has because I've been to his house several times, and being in the dream wasn't like being in his house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But his ability to identify things. He's always out in nature. He's always foraging. You know what I'm saying? He's always doing hiking and stuff in real life. And he's a craftsperson. Like his business is to craft ritual items. So rattles, drums. He makes rune sets himself, just like I do. But also all of the smudging wands, like with feathers and things. Like he makes these things from material that he either sources locally or has sourced for him naturally and ethically.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that.
Good deal.
That's literally his livelihood.
Very cool. So yeah, this is where I go with a lot of the stuff of like, okay, where are we? Why this place? You were not in a cave in the mountains. You were not at the bottom of the ocean. Why this place? So very definitely you've got your real life friend there, and you've got an expression of him and his practice. You've got placing yourself in the environment there. And I think being dimly lit and a low ceiling, it's like it's not intimacy is the wrong word, but it might be, but something of a closeness to it, something of a very small contained space, almost densely packed with something important, meaningful things, all the shelves crammed full of all the good stuff. So why is that setting important? Well, it kind of gives you the context of like, okay, what's about to happen. And he even says, let me show you some crazy shit. There's something you wanted to understand or see through that lens of, okay, imagine you're in a space that represents your friend. Imagine he's got something to show you, his perspective on life, his understanding of the world, how he conducts himself. If you look at it through his eyes in a way, or through an understanding of who he is, now consider what follows from that initial context. So I'm going somewhere like that with that. I don't have an idea of where we're going yet, but we're going to get there. I did want to come back to the idea of the door. You said you could kind of remember facing a door, and was it the door to the other room, or was it like the front door? If you think about it.
I think it was, again, if it was a door or a window, but it was a portal to the outside. Yeah. I was not looking into another room. I was looking outside of the structure that I was in.
I think that's a great way to put it, to the idea of a portal. So a window to the outside, a door to the outside, a portal. The idea of some place you could pass through where the light from the outside does shine. It was daytime, which I almost always forget to ask unless it comes up. I'm glad you mentioned it too. That can mean a bunch of different things. I don't know. Do you have any particular associations with day or night that would make it more relevant? Things happen in the daytime. Daytime usually means, it's the full illumination of when it's easier to see things, the brightness of day, the revelation of a clear sight type of thing. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. It either does or doesn't have a particular meaning.
Yeah, I mean, I see better in the daytime. Just my vision doesn't make for nocturnal vision. Ease of nocturnal vision. You know what I mean? So I have a harder time navigating in the dark because of my vision, but
gotcha.
Maybe than the average person, but
gotcha.
Yeah, and maybe, I like the nighttime. But
I know, me too. No, but I have the same issue with, especially like nighttime driving in the rain. Oh my God, I just stay home. Mix. I just don't do it. Yeah, no, I feel you. Yeah. And okay, I'm not much into the dream book thing of like one thing always means one thing to all people, but there's common collective unconscious style human experiences and light. And the fact that all the windows from the outside letting light in were necessarily small. It's like maybe some indication or to yourself of, I'm probably never going to fully grasp. I'm never going to be able to see fully everything that's in this place. My ability to perceive, it's going to be limited, and that's okay. What I'm here to learn, I don't have to see everything, but kind of acknowledging that to yourself of like, there's just not enough brightness of day to allow me full understanding. And that's okay. There's like, I've known lots of people that do things that I can't, and I will never understand it as well as they do because they're just better at it and spent more time at it and practice at it and have a different concept of it than I'm really able to grasp without embodying it the way they do. So there's nothing wrong with that. So I don't think it's a comparison of yourself as lesser, but like he's got a perspective on things that I'm never going to understand fully, but I can still benefit from. I mean, you're in the shop. You've been welcomed into this space and you're actually there. Okay. So the next thing, as far as, did anything else happen before you had a feeling that the rune was in your hand? Or was that almost like a jump cut where you just looked down and there it was, or you felt it suddenly? How did that come about?
Yeah, it was just kind of there. I don't have any recollection of how it got there. It was, I don't know how it came up. It was just kind of there.
And which hand did it appear in?
I mean, I'm right-handed, so I would have. I mean, but I can't definitively remember one way or the other which hand it was. Yeah, I don't want to say it was probably my right hand if that skews anything, but I am leaning towards that it was in my right hand just because that's my strong hand.
Fair enough. Nope. And you either, I rattle a lot of doorknobs. I haven't said this in a while on the air, but I ask a question. You don't have an answer. It's okay. I don't know. No strong impression. Yeah. Fair enough. So this is one of the things I do though. Like I've had this, I ask a question like which hand and they go, oh, it was my left. Oh, wow. And then they have a moment. Okay. When that happens, it's fantastic. And when it doesn't, we move on. So that actually could have been very relevant. I took a chance, whatever. Cast the next fly fishing, try and catch another fish of inspiration. Did anything else happen before the awareness of the rune? Like your friends speaking to you came afterwards?
Yeah, there was really no dialogue that I recall happening prior to that. The rune appearing. Okay. And then him saying what he said.
Gotcha. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about that rune. You said, well, I don't know that you said anything about it. What is that rune? What does it mean? Where might you find it in your religious practice or,
So Uruz, the rune Uruz, so that's the Proto-Germanic word for it. Ur, like you are, is another name for it, but it represents the hard U sound. So U, not like up or umbrella or under. It's the U sound, but in the letter U, but that kind of hard U sound. And what it has been, there's rune poems, you know what I mean? So every rune has like a meaning to it in the rune poems, and this rune in the one of the rune poems refers to it as the aurochs, which was an ancient wild bovine that existed in Northern Europe. So it was like an ox, and it has representation of like wild, reckless strength, it's like this unbridled wild power, because the aurochs were not domesticated cattle. The people at the time had, of course, cattle that they would raise, and that was their wealth and their livelihoods in many cases. But the aurochs were a wild, non-domesticated bovine that existed at the time. So it was like the representation of that wild power, that wild energy, that freedom.
Nice.
Sort of thing.
Very cool. Yeah. And so the question then becomes, why that rune? You did not choose an alternative rune to show yourself or to have placed in your hand by whatever powers it be, depending on how the story came about. And that, so if we had an epiphany maybe about the hand that it appeared in, it would be, okay, why? Let's say, sometimes I go off on these little tangents, but there's, I think there was I don't know if it's in Japanese or samurai tradition that, like, the right hand was strength and the left hand was benevolence or something like that. And that's kind of very common too. It's like, or in Middle Eastern culture, we'd say like the left hand is, you don't eat with your left hand because bathroom reasons, so sometimes there's reasons for that kind of stuff. But we didn't have a strong impression on that. And it would be like, if a different person had a symbol of the wild, untamed strength put in their benevolent hand, or the hand that they wipe with, it would have a meaning related to that, perhaps because of their cultural context. But definitely it has a meaning to your understanding of that particular rune. So there's something about in your hand is this the symbol of this power of wild, untamed power of maybe reckless strength that could be used foolishly to negative effect or impact. What am I saying here? You, at the very least, you wanted to go ahead.
No, I was agreeing with you there. That's all. It's again that just like unbridled strength, you know, that can get things done, but not really care about how it's done.
Yeah, if you get spontaneous thoughts or associations, cut me off and say, you know, that made me think when you said that, I thought X or whatever.
Right.
Most of the time I'm just rambling until it inspires something in other people. So,
cool.
But that is great too. So something about, okay, so we go through the story again a little bit, narrative arc wise. You're in the context of a shamanic healer's space, dense with wisdom that's a little, or knowledge that's maybe a little bit beyond what you can make the best use of because it's not your skill set. Now, within that context, you're showing yourself an icon of the potential for wild or reckless, untamed strength. And then your friend comes in. Now that you've seen those things, now that you've walked through that set and setting event, then your friend appears or comes in or chimes in that he is going to show you. How did you phrase it? I'm going to show you some wild shit.
Yeah.
And that's
about this room.
And that's interesting because so the wild, untamed nature of the runic icon, he's going to show you the wild shit.
Yeah.
And then that's how. Okay, where was your friend while you were initially doing the thing? Was he already in another room, or was he with you? Or
he was with me in the room, as I can recall. He was, again, it was a very small, closed quarters layout of the room, and he was in the same room with me.
He wouldn't be able to be very far away in the same room. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you already kind of in front of this table that the lady unrolled the stuff on? Is that what was in the middle of the room?
Yeah, I want to say it was kind of almost like a, not necessarily like dead set in the middle. It was like close to the wall that had other small windows by it, you know? So, I mean, it wasn't like up against that exterior wall, but it favored that side of the room.
Sure. It was set a little offset.
Closer to... Yeah.
That may or may not be relevant. I mean, I kept mentioning, I don't know how many times before we started recording, the idea of centering you on the mandala in the background and how that I thought was a fantastic composition. We do that in our dreams sometimes too. It's like where we place ourselves in these things. So there could be something to the slightly offset nature of this table that would then become the place of learning or demonstration of this woman that appears. May or may not. Yeah, maybe in your mind. And this is where it gets really, really tricky too. You can't say one reason for all people. It could be in your mind an apothecary shop of this nature. The table is always not in the center. Maybe that's just how your brain envisions it from you saw a movie and that stuck with you and now that's your impression of it. It could also be, what am I trying to say? If we think of the center, the bullseye in a way, putting something in the direct, dead, symmetrical center of a room as the most important place, this could be, if it makes sense to you, or who knows, placing it off to the side a little bit is like, this may not be universally relevant at all times, but it's still useful information, whatever you're about to learn.
It's still in the room.
It's still in the room. Yeah, but it's not in the center. There's something to that feels relevant to me is in this instance. It may not be, if you're like, I don't know, that doesn't really zing, but it's something to keep in mind. Sometimes I say to people, it's like, think of that concept of, well, it isn't symmetrical dead center like a bullseye, but it's in the room, as you said, like, and that seemed like it made sense to you too. Like, it's still in the space.
I hadn't thought of that before. Yeah,
that's what I do. That's what I'm trying to do is help those interesting thoughts. And then how does your friend say those words? What tone is it? Is it ominous? Is it joking? Elbow? How would you characterize his tone?
I would say, as I remember it, it was, he meant it. It was serious. Like, it wasn't like, I'm going to show you some wild shit about this rune. Ha 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 ha. No, it was like, I'm going to show you some wild shit about this rune. You know, he had like a serious business tone to him.
Okay. Yeah, and that would be something very different if it was joking, if it was playful, if it was, there could be a playful aspect of something, of like the excitement of, you're about to learn some things that'll blow your mind. And you could smile about that. But this was more like, I'm about to show you some things that are going to blow your mind, and they are very important. This is actually serious. Yeah. Let my tone communicate that to you. So that's interesting. I was going to dwell on that for like 2 seconds, kind of think, let that percolate in my head too. He's got and is that when, like, the moment the lady appeared, like suddenly the next thing you know, she's there unfolding the cloth on the table? Or did she approach? Was there a delay? Was there any, did he get up and walk out of the room at that point, and that's how he ended up in the other room? Anything happened physically?
Yeah, I think he left my presence. And then there she was. You know, okay. Like he went to do whatever else he was doing. Like, I remember he was, like, I could hear him in the other room when this lady appears and starts doing what she was doing. Like, I don't remember hearing anything of like the words. It was chatter, or essentially. Like, I knew there was other people besides him in the next room.
Okay.
Or outside of my, eyesight. But yeah, he said what he said, wandered off, and then there she was.
Yeah. And that's interesting too. So he didn't show you anything necessarily. It's not actually him showing.
Not in the dream.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Not in the dream.
So here's the way I'm looking at that, is like, you're showing yourself like he's, what is it? In a way, there's like, he's doing a bit of a pathfinding service in your dream, of the kind of like, now that you're looking at the world through this framework, that his unique perspective, what he has of value to offer to the world, you are within that space. You have a rune, you study runes. This is important to your understanding. Your religious perspective on the world is wrapped up in these runes and the tradition of them, and what they mean to the poetry, specifically the storytelling. He then says explicitly, you're going to learn something because of me, and then leaves. I'm not the teacher. So something about maybe looking at the world through this perspective, or what he has to teach you about the world, or a perspective on the world you could adopt in real life, it actually leads you to another source of information that's actually external to him, but that he was, like I said, sort of that pathfinding function of opening. It's like,
he has.
Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please.
But he has definitely shown me shit that kind of like after the fact, you know what I mean? Like, in our actual dealings with each other outside of a nocturnal vision. Yeah. You know what I mean? He's shown me some stuff, man. Like, he's definitely given that Urus aspect in our relationship. But yeah, in the moment at that time, he wasn't present or part of that. It wasn't like, I'm going to show you something right now. Yeah. It was just this, I'm going to show you some shit. And then walked away.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah. No. And that's very true. Cause like, what am I trying to say? There are phenomenon in life. Are you okay? When I've got my chair, like in an upright locked position, there's no room for this dog, and he doesn't know it. So he just about falls off. He's hiding there in my lap. We definitely have friends who open our eyes to a way of looking at the world that even when they're not present, we're able to understand a new experience better or differently because of them. They do show us things because we know them. They allow us to see the world in different ways. So I think there's something like that going on here. You're like, you put yourself in this context, you got your friend there to remind you of who he is and what he does and why. And he explicitly says, hey, this rune, I'm going to show you. Because of me, you're going to be able to see something you wouldn't otherwise have been able to understand as well. And then what is that? It goes into this. Now, bam, he wanders away because he's like, I'm not even the one who's going to show you. I mean, you're going to see it thanks to me in that sense. But the true lesson is going to come from this other source. And then this woman appears, and in any particular way, what are you doing, boo-boo? Hi. You got to sit down. If you want down, I'll put you down. Right. It's one of my many familiars here. And that's okay.
I noticed, yeah.
He wants to get down. Okay. Oh, hold on. You're attached. Oh, say hi. Say hi to all the people. Peanut butter. There he is.
Peanut butter.
That should be my thumbnail. Maybe it will be.
Yeah.
There you go. Put him down. Let him right. Sometimes he gets overheated. He wants to go drink some water. And, obviously, no. Thunderclap, no. The clouds open and this woman appears. She didn't teleport like Star Trek. You just kind of became aware suddenly she was there. No idea she came in through the door. She walked out of a shadowy corner like she was always there. Anything?
Nah, like it was just nothing that like stood out. Just she was just all of a sudden in the same room.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Rattling.
Like vanished. Appears out of thin air, maybe, but like again, like no,
Yeah.
I couldn't say. Yeah, she came out of a corner, or she came out of a closet, or came down some stairs. Like nothing like that. It was just he walks away, I turn around, and there she is.
There she is. Yeah, which is very interesting too. It's like if you imagine it physically, opening your eyes. Suddenly the world is in front of you, and we say that metaphorically too. Oh, my eyes were open to something. Your friend says he's going to show you something. And now this woman appears, and she only appears after he says, I'm going to show you. I think that's more confirmation that, because as soon as you had the thought, the associative connection was when you realized, oh, I'm going to learn something, or I have learned something from this person. Now you become aware. Your eyes become suddenly open. You can suddenly see someone new. So almost a very straightforward metaphorical understanding there. So you described her, and that's a fantastic description. I'm like, you said, well, I really couldn't see her very clearly. Fair enough. So you couldn't describe how long was her nose, what color were her eyes necessarily, but you know that she was short, kind of shrouded, as in enough clothing to obscure her appearance. Like you don't know if she was young or old. You don't know.
She was older. She was older and small framed. So thin. Okay. Kind of. I got the sense from her that she was an old lady, an old, thin lady. I just couldn't what color was her hair. Her skin was visible, but there was nothing like that I could see in her face that was like, other defining features. Her skin that was exposed was darker, like a really dark tan.
Gotcha. Any sense of gray hair or?
No, that I recall, because again, like her what she was wearing was like she was shrouded, so like a hood,
gotcha.
Like a cloak. You know what I mean? So it was very concealing to her major features.
Gotcha. Very interesting there with this. So it wasn't a person you knew in real life. It wasn't any easily recognizable, say, I
had no idea who they were.
Yeah. It was, so that's where I'm going with it. It's like, so this is an unknown woman, but it is definitely a woman, it's definitely an older woman, her skin is actually maybe a little darker, tanned, maybe came to mind. So maybe she's been out in the sunshine doing work. Maybe she's bringing that iconic representation of having been in the light of understanding as carried on the dark tanness of her skin. Maybe something like that. Just a little flavor to the idea of maybe she's got something to say because for whatever reason. But mysterious in terms of like, it's not a specific woman. It's more maybe broadly, we can go through many different layers of it, but there's maybe a feminine perspective to what she's going to show you. It wasn't a man that showed up and said, here, let me show you from this. So sometimes masculine, feminine makes a difference. Are there, are there traditional roles? Not traditional roles is the wrong way to put it, but like unique perspectives in Norse mythology that women understand certain things better, men understand certain things better. I mean, why would a woman come to teach you something versus a man if there were some mystical message to it? Any concept of that? And it doesn't have to be 100%,
Yeah, there is. I mean, traditionally, the practice of like trance work and mysticism was traditionally a feminine thing. It was done by the women. Odin himself learned things from a Vorva, a seeress, And any men that did it at the time were kind of looked upon in a negative light. Oh, you're doing the woman's work. That sort of thing.
Gotcha.
So yes, the women had a status when they were called Seithkona, the seeress women. They did that sort of trance-like work. They did that mystical, woo-woo, magical stuff.
Sure.
Back
Okay.
then. Yeah.
So this is so good. So it would be actually, if we go with the idea that it's a woman for a reason, and women are typically associated with maybe the mystical or trance-like work, seeing the seeress role. Where am I going with this kind of stuff? So it's a person with kind of more metaphysical knowledge. This wasn't a person who, she didn't unroll a blueprint literally for a building. Like, here's how you build it. And that would be a different kind of guy in a hard hat. There's an iconic thing to that. So there's something spiritual that she's trying to communicate to you, some deeper understanding that she wants you to see. And she does. She unrolls this large, and it's interesting that it's a table runner, or at least,
it was white.
Yeah.
And I want to say, now that I'm talking about it again, I think what she would, the symbols weren't recognizable, but to the best of my recollection, they were painted in red.
Okay.
I don't know if it was blood or if it was red dye.
It was red paint.
For some reason, it stinks out that the symbols were colored red on the white.
Yeah.
Table runner.
And it is interesting too. I mean, it could have been anything else. She could have pulled out a big sheet of butcher paper and tacked it up on the wall. It could have been she spilled sand all over the table and started drawing in it with her finger. But this table runner, after just being primed a bit, maybe by our discussions of feasts and different things like that, that might be unique to your traditions. Something about a table runner says, it calls to mind something you would find on a feast table. And the table runner is a decorative element, but you would also, that's where you would put all the rows of, maybe if you're having a communal feast type of thing, like that's, you'd line up all the plates of offerings, the things you're going to give to other people, the potluck dishes on the table runner in a way. And then people come and they sit on either side of the table runner and take from the middle. So there's a kind of, I'm going to stop there and just let you kind of tell me what you think of that general idea of linking it to feasting and the placement of the type of item in that place on the table.
Well, so much, yeah. I mean, things happen at the table where, yes, it's, you dine, but it's also a place where you socialize and actually kind of, exchange words and experiences and stories. And there's a lot that happens at a table that is more than just eating.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a community building thing, like it brings people together for more than just sustenance.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. That kind of thing. I didn't want to throw too many words at you. I figured you'd have your own better words. I think it does. So that's another piece of the puzzle in terms of the framing of what she's then about to do. Is like, instead of putting food, she could have put food on the table. She didn't. She drew runes that were the more like Icelandic charms, more mandala like is how you described it. So they're a little more decorative in a way. Yeah. But also telling a story. Like if you could read them, they would say something. Or not so much?
Yeah, they have like the Icelandic staves, or those Icelandic charms. There's a book about them, and again, they're very modern. The oldest ones date back to after the Viking Age, and they're not even Norse in their origins, which is the other interesting thing about it. Is a lot of people like this mandala that's behind me. A lot of that's this is nothing Norse. The runes are, but the symbol itself is nothing Nordic. It's Solomonic, if you want to even get down that road. It's
conception.
But it's magic. They're magical charms, and so different charms in this Galderbrook mean different things. You paint them or you carve them, or you place them on certain things, or you put them on certain places. to achieve something of a magical outcome. You know what I mean? And different ones mean different things, and you can kind of make them up as you go. You can blend certain elements of a stav onto another thing and make it your own. So there's some free form work to it, but there's a whole book of Icelandic charms that shows you like what this thing, that, or the other's for. But again, like that's what they resembled. That's not what they were.
Gotcha.
They had like a similarity to them.
Yeah. And then were you able to go ahead? Yeah.
One other thing I was thinking of is like because she was painting them with a red dye or a red stain, like it was painting. It wasn't a stamp. She wasn't carving it. She was painting it. And there's a saying, there's a phrase, there's in one of the poems, there's a stanza or a verse talking about runes. And even though these weren't runes that she was painting, one of the things that it says is like, do you know how to carve them? Do you know how to read them? Do you know how to stain them? Do you know how to wield them or use them? Do you know how to ask of them? Do you know how to blood them? Do you know how to send them? Do you know how to sacrifice them? And it's asking the person that's reading it is, you know, all these things can be done or should be done before you start using them or implementing them. You know, like, do you even know how to ask of them? Do you know how to send them? Do you know how to paint them? Do you know how to do all these things? And that's one of the things, like, just as many years ago as I had this dream, this is the first time I thought of that connection with that particular phrase or that verse to that occurrence in the dream.
Yeah,
she was literally staining something. She knew how to stain.
Nice. That's why we do these things. It's like normally, okay, I go in not certain at all we're ever going to get anything out of it and terrified that I'm going to be able to give the dreamer nothing. We get a certain point along, I ask enough questions, the dog won't stop barking, and eventually I'll let you out in a minute. Calm down. Get your baby. He wants me to throw his toy now. He's had his water. He's had his nap.
He's like, let's do it.
He's like, shit. We're almost done, buddy. Hold on. Oh boy. Anyway. And then we get to this point where some things start kind of falling. I think we're very close to something when things like that start coming back out. What I would relate it to, and then this, I ask this at different points in the conversation sometimes, but what was going on in your life 3 years ago that you felt like you needed to learn how to stain the runes properly before some endeavor? Were you beginning on a certain journey at the time? Like you're just starting something, or you're wondering if you're expert enough to demonstrate something?
So this happened this dream was in 2021. I remember now. I said 2 or 3 years ago. It was 2021, the winter of 2021. I had just been out to there to his place earlier that year. If I recall correctly, I think that's had to have been the year that I went out there to visit him for the first time.
Oh.
And it was also that was also the year that I went on my first journey of shamanic nature. I took psychedelics for the first time in my life. Earlier. So I was like, November was when I had that psychedelic experience, and then it was into December or so when I had this dream that I'm describing.
It came after. Okay.
Yeah, it came after that, and I had been out to his place, and for the first time, that right after that shamanic experience, that psychedelic experience.
Yeah, and this dream stuck with you for all those years since then.
Oh yeah, because again, it's one of the most vivid things that I have recollections of in terms of dreams. Like other silly things that I've encountered or whatever never really stick out in my mind the way this one does.
Yeah. So you've got a very so at this time the first time you'd been out to see this guy's place, and he's got physical evidence of his dedication to his craft all over the place, and then you represent that in your mind in the dream in a slightly different way. And also you have this a desire for the mystical. In a way, you've got the mystical woman who's maybe going to guide you on that path, or at least a representation of the possibility of opening yourself to that kind of instruction. And this is all kind of culminating or leading up to the idea of that because you have access to a person who knows some things and can be a bit of a guide or a mentor in some ways, if you step into their space where they operate, not physically, but you know what I'm saying? And then you allow them to show you something, or you look at things through their perspective, then you could have at least the possibility to observe and maybe begin to truly master the staining of the runes yourself. And that this was a path, at least at the very least, a path open to you. I wouldn't say it was prophetic, but you were considering, is this what I want to do? Is this, am I going to
really
dedicate myself to this in a way? Yeah.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that, I have up to that point been working with the runes for years prior to me going out there, and prior to the psychedelic experience, prior to going out there and seeing him. When I went out to go see him, again, right on the heels of the coattails of that experience, that shamanic experience myself, he had crafted a set of runes for not just me, but for my tribe, for the people who I'm very closely interconnected with. So they're relics of our group.
Nice.
They don't belong to me; they belong to us. And those were gifts that he presented to us as a representation of the magic that is working within all of us and within this tribe of ours. So yeah, like pieces are being put together now that I hadn't quite put together before. It was like the timing of everything and when it happened and the why. Like, she showed up to be that source of knowledge, or that like guide in a way. Like you may not know what's going on here, but this is kind of what it's all about. You don't always know. You just gotta watch, just learn, just observe.
Well, that too, and
don't ask.
It's also,
I'm not talking. Yeah,
you're just observing. You're just learning from the master. She's doing it, whatever she's doing. And that's fantastic. Like you said, for many years before that, you'd been working with the runes or studying the runes, and there's a difference between a beginner and someone who's adept, and there's a point where you kind of cross over, where you go now and you're able to fulfill that poetry, that line of it. Like, do you really know what you're doing before you start telling other people you know what you're doing, or putting it into practice in a way that, what do they say? A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. You think you understand something better. You're playing with powers you don't understand. This may have been like that line of saying you have the ability to, like in a way, what am I trying to say? A self-acknowledgement type of experience where you're like, I can learn this. I can become adept at staining the runes. And whether or not you will or want to is a completely different thing of saying, I actually believe this is possible, that I can, lean into that. And if you choose to. So, oh, wow, that's good. That's and we're running out of time, but that's I think that's all we can get out of it. And I think it's left you with a little bit of a feeling of like, whoa.
It's great to be able to divest into it and flesh it all out and talk about things. And honestly, I haven't talked about this particular dream since. Well, I brought it up to him the other day, and kind of reminded him about it because of some recent events. But he, up until the other day, we hadn't talked about it for years.
Yeah, nice.
So now getting a chance to,
and there's a reason I came back, and then you found me, and you were able to talk about it.
I'd
be very interested. I always want to hear back from dreamers too. Is like, does anything change in your life now that you've been able to see yourself maybe more clearly, and the path you took, and how this dream kind of crystallized some of that stuff and makes sense in retrospect? Now what do you do? Now where do you go with that understanding? And maybe you got to sleep on it. Maybe you don't know for a couple of years, but if I always like hearing back from people what they learned from working with me, and hopefully have been able to put it into use. Come here.
Yeah, come here. Absolutely. Come here. I know once this is up on your channel, I'll be sharing it to him and others, of course, on my platforms, because this has been really great. It's been a lot of fun.
Nice. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I always drag these things out too long because I never know how to. I'm like, I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but legit autistic with social stuff. I'm like, have we talked long enough to say goodbye? I don't know. But I'll wrap.
A Southern goodbye.
Right, exactly. Or as they say, an Irish goodbye. Where'd he go? It's funny that it gets called an Irish goodbye, but it's Southern goodbye. It's actually ubiquitous. So many cultures have their words for it. Well, I would just say this has been our friend Jesse Aetherwagen from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He's the host of the Random Heathen Ramblings on the Midgard Musings channel on YouTube and other podcasting platforms. I'm going to put the link tree in there below. And for my part, I'll just say, would you kindly like, share, subscribe, tell your friends? Always need more viewers, volunteer dreamers, etc. If you want to see more episodes, help me make an episode. I don't always have a lot of people out there. I'm not that big yet. Someday maybe. 16 currently available works of historical dream literature. The most recent, Dreams and Their Meanings by Horace G. Hutchinson. All this and more at BenjaminTheDreamWizard.com. And just again, Jesse, thank you for being here. It's a good talk.
Thanks for having me.
All right, wonderful. And everybody out there, thanks for listening.